Mr. Ray was involved in several secret societies himself. This is a guy, Mr. Ray has got my absolute respect for, he's got my respect because he is the real deal. He knows of what he speaks. He knows about secret societies. He knows about the occult. He knows about what's going on, how mind-controlled we all are. He knows where the bodies are buried. He's got just a tremendous resume. He's had experience with MI6, Interpol, the United States Secret Service. I could go on and on and on and on and on, but I've got to tell you this. Mr. Ray is a guy who is an expert. If anybody out there knows the truth about what's taking place with respect to the matrix in which we live, Illuminati, the power players behind the puppets, it's Ricky Ray. I've actually followed his work for a long time and not really getting it until a few things clicked, until one of my good friends, a man inside the intelligence community, said, look, this is actually going on. You've got to understand what exactly is what's going on. And pointed me to various things, and sure enough, it was Ricky Ray who was the man behind a lot of the writings that the intelligence insider was telling me to read and learn and study and understand, because, folks, we are living in the matrix. So it's our distinct honor. It's our tremendous honor to have with us tonight Ricky Ray. With that, I'm going to bring him on and welcome him to the Hagman and Hagman Report. Ricky, how are you, sir?
Good evening. How are you?
Very well. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight and for your willingness to talk about things that are, well, pretty uncomfortable. I'll tell you that if people knew what was going on out there, and I know that you're gonna shed some light on just how deep this rabbit hole that we live in goes.
I will.
Okay. What we'll do is, well, let me ask you this, Mr. Ray. Where do you want to start here? Because we've got some time, but I do want to give you the ability to yourself kind of structure your presentation tonight to our audience in the best way possible. So you tell me where you want to, how you want to start, where you want to start, and we'll go from there.
Well, I thought about this, Mr. Hagman, and for the sake of your listeners, and because of my old website, I had to publish a legal disclaimer explaining where I am at spiritually, that I was not a New Ager, that I am a Christian, that I do believe in Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah who is come in the flesh, according to 1 John, that he's not a spook, like they're teaching in the evangelical circles, and to lay it out there about where I'm at spiritually, and because of my past that I had walked away from, and I had to be very clear on that, so it didn't give people the illusion that I was giving them free info to indoctrinate them into the New World Order agenda and all. In fact, just now I'm sending you some videos that we did on where the Jesus and Mary images really came from in the 1400s. The third man at the royal wedding in red, who was the Duke of Kent. Hidden truths that in the year 2008, animal sacrifice began in Israel at Passover. This was sent to us by former Mossad. The Ninth Gate. Edmund Rothschild. You ever see that movie, The Ninth Gate? And the little LCF character, meaning Lucifer, do you know that that's Edmund de Rothschild Asset Management, LCF, in the UK?
Wow, I didn't know that. And ladies and gentlemen, you might want to get if you're listening to this at your computer,
you will see video links that have just come to you in email.
Okay. All right, we're going to post them in our interactive chat room. But, folks, you might want to get a pencil and paper and take some notes on this, because Ricky Ray has not granted an interview in a number of years, at least 3 years that I know of. I've got to tell you something. And by the way, we're going to post the links to those videos on our website prominently after the show, because they're so important, Mr. Ray. But go ahead and continue. Now, and I do want to just say this: you are a Christian. So you believe that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. Just so
Absolutely.
people understand where they're coming from. Okay. But you were involved in several secret societies. You were elbow to elbow with these people, shoulder to shoulder, right?
Yes, I was.
All right. Well, take it away. Go ahead and take it away, even if you want to talk about how you got into it, if you feel comfortable with that, or what you saw, or just we're going to give you the floor. Go ahead and present what the heck's going on today.
Well, mass media has been indoctrinating people since World War II. Before the Nazis became a world phenomenon in World War II that was, set up illegally and bogusly, I believe and know 100% that the Nazis were set up deliberately as bad guys so that they could pursue black science, where in the Western Hemisphere, the pursuit of that kind of black science would have caused a world outcry. And so they had a manufactured bad guy who could go as deep as it goes in technology and indoctrination, mind control, trauma, torture, and get away with it for a while, and then they could be fought against, defeated, and all their knowledge intercepted and taken from them and be tucked away among the Allies, like Project Paperclip, sending Nazis in high places to the United States, like former SS Werner von Braun to NASA. Joseph Mengele in the Rat Line makes his way to America and Canada for MK Ultra as Dr. Green, or other insidious things like Reinhard Gehlen of Nazi SS intelligence was brought into the OSS with his entire SS community after World War II, when the OSS became the CIA in 1947.
Wow. So what you're telling us...
really, really deep.
Okay,
yes.
But just so I'm clear, what you're telling us, and to the listening audience, that we essentially continued the Nazi agenda just under a different name and ostensibly for, humanitarian reasons, I guess, or if anyone asked, it would be for humanitarian reasons. Is that what you're saying, or is it something a little bit more, is it something deeper than that?
Well, it goes a little deeper. The Nazis in the 30s, to indoctrinate their nation to be a bunch of psychopaths with no conscience, used television. This was something that was not widespread. And the Nazis, when they intercepted that, saw the potential of how it could indoctrinate people through repeated timed images and sounds, and so they figured out ways to produce it cheaply. And in the year 1948, following the founding of the CIA and a great many things in the Western Hemisphere, everybody and their dog could afford a TV set to indoctrinate them. And so it began.
Okay.
In that year. And the year was also notable because the transistor was developed. And
that same year.
Great many,
okay.
Yes. And a lot of funny science came out of the Nazis that we had intercepted. And these Project Paperclip refugees got out on Vatican passports under Pope Pius XII, who was a Nazi supporter. A lot of them went into the Rat Line to the South Pole and Antarctica. They called New Schwabenland and made their way to Argentina, Brazil, where there were Nazi support governments like Perón. And then some made their way back to Europe, but a lot made their way up the Rat Line, like Mengele and everything for MK Ultra in the year 1953.
Okay, how much into the occult, and maybe you can break this down. Maybe this is too big of a bite of a question to ask, but how much into the occult were the Nazis back in the 40s and 30s, 40s, and?
Well, it goes back. If you ever read the book by Dr. Scott Lively, a minister who is very valid. He wrote a book called The Pink Swastika, and you can look up Pink Swastika in a search engine and read the entire book about the founding of the Nazis on some very funny things that were like Boy Scouts for pedophiles in the 1800s and everything, called the Wandervogel. And a lot of the molested boys grew up to be butch gay men that founded the Nazis, like Ernst Röhm and other ones. So there was this gay agenda, but it was the macho butch gay agenda, macho men, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That was pushing,
Exactly.
And in the 1800s, Ariosophist occultists like Richard Wagner were more influential on the development of the Nazis than his heir, Nietzsche, the philosopher of existentialism. But it was Wagner and the Ariosophists who were occult roots of the Aryan philosophy, the Nazis ideologically and spiritually. And then in the 1920s, the Vril Society was founded by occultist Karl Haushofer, who was one of the ghostwriters of Mein Kampf and one of Hitler's educators when he was locked away at Landsberg after the Putsch incident in 1923. Karl Haushofer also invented what's called geopolitics. Does this make a little sense or connect dots? Karl Haushofer coined the term geopolitics for the taking of living space, or Lebensraum. And he was highly occult. He developed the Vril Society, which was just like if you ever saw the 1984 movie Dune and the Sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit occultists, that was what it was. Women who were deeply immersed in the occult and used to channel and intercept fallen angelic knowledge to develop the black science of the Nazis, like flying saucers. Straight up, man.
Wow. Well,
and you were talking to a guy who is a member of the Vril Society because it still exists.
To this day, it still exists?
Yes. They moved through the rat line and made their way into Venice, and they have a house in Munich.
Okay. I just want to say to the audience, Mr. Ray, I just want to say this, and I want to thank Marianne. In the studio, I'm actually holding a copy of the book, The Pink Swastika, and I've got to tell you, it's a pretty heavy read. It does talk about Karl Haushofer. It talks about, suggesting that, of course, Haushofer was a homosexual, in addition to the demonization things taking place and so on and so forth. But it's definitely, folks, if you have the opportunity, the Pink Swastika, the subtitle "Homosexual in the Nazi Party," grab yourself a copy. It's important reading. It's important background reading for what Mr. Ray is speaking about. But so this whole thing still exists today. The society, I guess, what you're saying.
Yes, and the symbols of the Schwarz Zone or the Black Sun and the Vril Society are still illegal in Germany and can get you arrested for displaying them in public. They made their way in the rat line, a lot of them back to Venice, where the black nobility began. Of the Venetian side of it, and then some of them made their way back to Germany, and they do have a house in Munich. They have a site called Causa Nostra, Our Cause.
Okay. Now let me ask you this. Sorry for interrupting here, but a lot of people hear the phrase and they will do a search on black nobility. At some point, maybe this is the proper time. Maybe you can tell people what the black nobility is, because it does have relevance for today. But at your leisure, let people know what the black nobility is.
Actually, on the new website that I'm setting up within the next 2 weeks, I'm going to do a rundown of the Black Nobility 101. And basically what it is, and I'm telling your audience, these are the ruling elite families that go back to Rome as empire in the 1st century, and bloodlines going back that far. And some writers have used black nobility as a generic term for the Venetian side of the black nobility, but it's a little more complex than that, and real history will bear this out, and it goes back to Rome as empire. And so I'm going to give you guys a rundown of the black nobility's history when Rome became empire, and very quickly run you through the 4 family groups and all, because this goes back to the times of Jesus of Nazareth and what was operating and why he was politically outspoken, both he and John the Baptist, against it.
Okay.
Well, because these families went on to become the black nobility royal families as we know them, or the ruling class of the world today in the Western Hemisphere. And basically where it begins on one side is you have the Gentile, non-Jewish black nobility families that happened of the split of Rome. And in the 2nd century, Rome split as empire to become the 2 iron legs that Daniel the prophet saw, east and west. This is historically borne out. Later, Justinian tried to unite it. It did not work, and it just continued to fragment as empire, cratering from within and without. In fact, the Eastern Empire lasted longer, but across Italy was a diagonal split around the 4th and 5th, and especially the 7th century. And the ones that went to the south and towards the Vatican and Rome are the families that became the papal black nobility, like Juan Carlos, King of Spain, the Borgias, and things like that. And the Borgias are the papal black nobility family that gave birth to all the images of Jesus and Mary that came up in the Renaissance. We did a whole video on it. I just sent you the link to it. It's called The Greatest Blasphemy Ever Told. You watch that, and you'll know where those images came from. Next, on the northern and eastern split was Venice. And Venice, the royal families and the mercantile class all fled to Venice in its swamps and the island off the coast there when the Huns and others were invading. And so this gave birth to the Venetian black nobility as a seafaring mercantile class. And their way of doing things, even occult, is a little different than the papal black nobility families and the way that they all play. But when the Lombards came down from Germany and invaded that part of Italy, then they migrated into Eastern Europe, as we know it, and then Germany. And that's how the Venetian black nobility got a foothold in Germany and the Netherlands. It was that migration from the Lombards around the 700s. And papal black nobility continued. In Israel, when the diaspora began in 70 A.D., they split, and a lot of the Pharisees and Sadducees went to Iraq, Babylon, and wrote the Babylonian Talmud, which is essentially the writings of the leaven of the Pharisees that Jesus condemned put to paper in the Babylonian Talmud, that is the root of Judaism as we know it today, not the Old Testament. And they migrated up north into the Russias and Eastern Europe. So in that migration, they were tied intimately to the Venetian black nobility, and they are the Ashkenazis. This is the root of the Jewish black nobility, as in Rothschild. You heard that name? And then the split of the other Jews in the diaspora that moved along the Mediterranean through Europe and Greece and Spain and along North Africa and intermarried with the Berbers and other stuff and made their way into Europe. Those are the Sephardim. And out of that is a black nobility name that everybody knows. It was called Rockenfeld, that we know today as Rockefeller. And that's Sephardim.
That's where it came from.
Black nobility.
Okay.
You know?
And is that where the ties to the Jew, you know how people say, well, everything's controlled by the Jews, the banks and so on. Is this where that intersection comes in?
Yes. The diaspora, when it split the Jews east and west, and later the Roman Empire was split east and west, it gave birth to the Venetian black nobility to the east and the Ashkenazis who interacted with each other in their migrations into Eastern Europe and up into Germany, where they got a foothold. But the Mediterranean Sephardim were tied to the papal black nobility who never left Rome and settled in there in that split and migrated into Spain, France, and things like that. So they were intimate with each other, too, as mercantile class, and became the viziers, the bankers of the papal Gentile black nobility. And that's how the four groups actually started. You had the east of the Venetian Gentile black nobility and the Ashkenazis, like the name Rothschild, but on the west side, where Rome was at, and their migration along the Mediterranean too, the papal Gentile black nobility and the Sephardim black nobility. And among the Jewish people today, the Sephardim and the Ashkenazis are the problem, and they are prejudicial and hard on other Jewish people of other historical migrations in history, like the Africans from Ethiopia, the Falashas, who migrated down there in the time of Solomon.
Okay, but ultimately, did this lead to the Weimar Republic back in the 1920s?
It did.
Okay.
The Weimar Republic was, again, tied to the Venetian black nobility, and the perversion just went too far. And they dismantled it because they had a bigger agenda in mind. And the papal black nobility with Pope Pius, or Pacelli, who was a royal of the papal black nobility families, became Pope Pius XII, supported the Nazis. In fact, Hitler was a professing Catholic, though he was a little more than that. We all know.
Of course.
The grandson of Salomon de Rothschild, House of Vienna Rothschild, and Maria Schicklgruber, their grandson. This man didn't come to power by accident. But on the other side, Winston Churchill and all of the Venetian black nobility, and his mama, who was the mistress of King Edward VII, got pregnant, and so he married her off conveniently to Randolph Churchill, who was a syphilis-infected man who could not reproduce, and they had their little baby Winston. And that's how Winston Churchill rose and had the mentor in his daddy, King Edward VII. Venetian black nobility, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, and out of Hanover. Yes, sir.
Wow.
And if you look at photographs of Winston Churchill as an older man and pictures of King Edward VII, spitting image, man. Royal bastards are as old as time itself, man.
Well, I've heard some things. For example, in today's world, Bill Clinton's father, for example.
Winthrop Rockefeller or Rockefeller.
Exactly. People, when we have discussions, for example, about these things with friends, and I say, we talk about Clinton's father, for example, and others, the lineage of others.
You can go to Bush, to Prescott and his influence and help with the Nazis, the Ford Foundation, and it goes on and on and on. The ties are there, and they're endless.
But the lineage.
George W. is the ninth cousin of Prince Charles. That's why they have the hook nose and big ears.
Wow.
They look so much alike. They are ninth cousins.
Ninth
bloodlines,
cousins.
And they are of the Venetian black nobility.
Now,
it's like Bush Sr., when he boasted in 1988 at the elections about that 1,000 points of light, man, he was talking about the ritual chamber in the Chateau Ameroy, the castle of the Dark Mother in Belgium, that is controlled by the royalty, or the Blue Salon in Belgium. That's what the 1,000 points is. It's a ritual chamber that has a dome ceiling like a planetarium with 1,000 points of light in astrological star shapes. And that's what the 1,000 points of light that George Herbert Walker Bush was boasting about in 1988.
Openly, while everyone was thinking that what he was talking about was so harmless and
enlightening.
Great.
And that indicated he exposed that he had been there and taken part in Luciferian rites that involve child sex, human sacrifice, and everything for the most costly drug on planet Earth that comes from the pineal gland of victims.
You're going to have to
about the occult, you know.
Wow.
And I will send you a video about the most costly drug and where it comes from that the black nobility of all of them indulge in. You know, G8's and Bilderberg, which is coming up, is going to have a new king presiding, you know. Willem Andrew, who became king on Walpurgis, you know, Beltane this year when his mother abdicated, Queen Beatrix, the daughter of Prince Bernard, the guy who founded Bilderberg and was Nazi SS. You know, so they got a new king that's going to be presiding at Bilderberg this year. And they go there as royals to see that their lackeys there do what they command. They get their party knowledge from the fallen angelic host they worship at their masquerades or their social events. You know,
Holy
that
cow.
the public won't see. And then Bilderberg and the stuff in the G8 summits are just their lackeys doing their will. That the black nobility look in on.
Okay. Mr. Ray, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought right there. Folks, listeners, you can see how deep this rabbit hole goes. We are talking, it's our distinct honor to be talking with Ricky Ray, an insider, a former insider of several secret societies, giving you the real truth, some very fascinating, very important information. You're looking deep into the Matrix, and when we say we give you the news in 3D, this is part of it. I got to tell you, it's my honor, it's our honor, Joe and I, to have Mr. Ricky Ray on once again. He's not a man that gives interviews lightly. The information he has is heavy. We're going to have the videos which he has sent. We'll have those posted on our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on this, the 29th day of May, 2013. We're going to be back right after these messages. Please stay with us.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the Hagman and Hagman Report this Wednesday, May 28, 2013. We were joined by our special guest, Ricky Ray. For those of you who are joining us late, Ricky Ray was a former member of several secret societies who has changed his life and is now a believer of Jesus Christ. Mr. Ray has come on to talk about the New World Order, the tactics they use, the occult, some of the history behind it, and the influence they wield.
Everything you know, folks, or everything you think you know is a lie. And that's the best way I can describe it, Joe. When I started researching this, I was just amazed. And a lot of the research material that I used was authored by Mr. Ricky Ray. With that, we want to welcome him back. God bless you, sir. Thank you for being on our program. Let's pick up where we left off. Go ahead and continue. We were talking about several issues. Well, the black nobility and its presence, influence today, plus a new king for the Bilderbergers, right?
Yes, that caught my attention.
Well, Mr. Ray, just go for it. Continue with this. And why is this important, by the way? This new king for the Bilderbergers.
Well, Beatrix is in her late 70s, and so she abdicated and stepped down so that her son, Willem Alexander, will take over. But she did it on the occult holiday of Walpurgis Beltane, exactly 2 years to the day of the occult royal wedding, which was Hieros Gamos for the next king, William, and his wife, Kate. It's pretty well known that I was the guy that exposed the occult royal wedding before it even was announced that it was going to be at Westminster Cathedral, or that the Archbishop of Canterbury, initiated Druid Rowan Williams, was going to preside at that wedding. And I exposed it, and every time the news released something about it, I just added it to the article about the royal wedding. And then I followed up, because at the royal wedding, some weird occult things were happening. One was that there were only 3 men in the red uniform that echoes the Knights of Malta, for one thing. But the other thing was these 3 men in red were very unique. One was Prince William. The other was his real daddy, Prince Philip. I just sent you an article about that. about who's your daddy. You know,
Okay.
because Philip impregnated Diana and everything. She had to be a virgin, which she was, and then she had a forced birth on the summer solstice of 1982, the year of the dog, and gave birth to William, which was intended and everything. And Philip married her off to the incompetent, who has no children really, Prince Charles, you know, who was attached to, his mistress, but had to give that up to marry Diana that year so that she could give birth legitimately to the next heir of the throne. Charles was incompetent, and his the inbreeding, and I sent you an article on the inbreeding of the black nobility that's caused some defective and incompetent royals that cannot take the throne. Charles couldn't, his brothers could not, and his sister Anne could not. They were by Elizabeth, but she had William, and then later through Hewitt, the red-haired military guy, she had the other son, Prince Harry, you know, that was not by Charles too. But the kicker is that on that occult royal wedding, the three men in red were William, Prince Philip, not his daddy, like people think, as Prince Charles, who sat way on the end of the bench in a black uniform, and the third man in red was His Royal Highness, the Duke of Kent, Prince Edward, who is seventh in the line of succession, but he's also been the Grand Master of Scottish Rite and York Rite Freemasonry since the year 1967, the year that the Western Hemisphere was indoctrinated into Brave New World at the Monterey Pop Festival.
Okay, I didn't. No, that's new to me. 1967. Okay, if you can explain that a little bit, because I didn't hear about that.
Yes, I will. That year, Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent, became Grand Master of Freemasonry. They had to speed up some agendas because some illegal acts took place that year, and so he took over Freemasonry, both the York and Scottish Rite and everything, and that is on the UGLE site, the Grand Lodge in England. In fact, you can go there, and you know that 2 days before the royal wedding, on the 27th, he gave a message to all Freemasons high up about mentorship and indoctrination. It's worth reading, and I just sent you that article on the third man in red, his history. He's a field marshal over there in England, been involved in some very dark military adventures, and a lot of people, they want to blame either the Vatican or the Zionist side, but they're all in bed together, and the black nobility royals and their viziers in the banking families on the Jewish side of the black nobility are all in bed together financially and taking over the world and preparing the way for Antichrist. You know? But the Western Hemisphere was being indoctrinated with TV, bombarding it with repeated messages to break down the family structure. In the year 1955, 2 movies came out that gave birth to what we call teen culture, and the young class of affluent, spoiled kids who basically rebel against authority. And because of 2 movies that came out in the year 1955, they were The Blackboard Jungle and Rebel Without a Cause, with James Dean, who was dead at that time by then. But those movies had a lot of media push to create the word teenage culture, and the word teenager didn't even exist until that time. And this was designed to break up the family more and more. But by the year 59, and the death of 3 important rockers in America and some in England, then there was a gap, and they filled it with manufactured pop stars like Pat Boone and Disney clones like Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello with the doo-wop era, and they had it in England as the Mercy Beat. But they saw a movie by Federico Fellini, La Dolce Vita, And the images and sounds, because rock never died in mainland Europe, but that image and sound became the images of the 60s and the blueprint that was used by mass media for the great social experiment of the 60s. And they had agents like Aldous Huxley and Timothy Leary, who's known now as a CIA asset, you know, in the youthful counterculture, you know. And Huxley, even before 1984, wrote Brave New World that came right from the Round Table and his brother Julian Huxley and the agendas to indoctrinate the Western Hemisphere into a soft totalitarian rule where the people love their slavery as long as they've got sex, drugs, rock and roll, the unholy trinity, right?
Oh, yeah. And how many people? How many people have heard that? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, folks. You're familiar with that?
The unholy trinity, and that happened in the 50s, but it really got amplified in the 60s. But something happened in '67 during the Vietnam conflict. There was a spy ship floating around near Israel in waters, the USS Liberty, and it was a spy ship, and they pretty well knew, everybody in the world knew, that the 6 Days War was jumping. But something illegal was happening too. They were in the Golan Heights invading, taking Mount Hermon, which sits exactly at 33.33 degrees latitude and longitude. And the reason was because the apostate rabbis, the Sabbateans, wanted that property back where the fallen angels landed in the Book of Enoch, in the times of Jared, and polluted the earth for 1,431 years that you can count in the book of Genesis, generations. But Mount Hermon sits at 33.33 degrees, and abominable rites took place there. And they recaptured it illegally in the Golan Heights while the 6-day war raged, and the spy ship Liberty caught that. And so they attacked it and tried to sink it with the intent to get the U.S. involved and overtake Egypt and blame it on them. But it didn't happen. They didn't sink the Liberty. Some people survived. It got shot up, and that was on the 8th of June in 1967. And so they had to do something very fast to get the world's eyes off of it. So they had to speed up the great social experiment. And so in California, the Monterey Pop Festival took place from the 16th on through the 18th plus for about 3 days, and they brought MC'd bands from England, MC'd by the Tavistock Institute over there, and Laurel Canyon in America, like the Mamas and Papas, and CIA agent John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas. And I recommend reading Dave McGowan's site about Laurel Canyon if you want to know what really happened in the 60s.
Okay. Now, before we get too far going here, for our new listeners unfamiliar with what you're talking about, what is the Tavistock Institute? And I know that the Beatles were associated with that, but what is that?
The Tavistock Institute was manufactured by the ruling class to facilitate agendas aimed at global rule. And they investigated into things like mind control, propaganda, and a great many things in the 20s. In fact, it's well known that when Hitler was in England at that time, he had run into things going on at the Tavistock Institute that probably groomed him to be the next chancellor of Germany. Straight up.
Wow. Wow.
And
okay.
You can read facts on that at Dr. Henry Makow's site.
Oh, okay, and we will put up a link to that on our webpage as well after the show tonight. Now, how? Because you brought in the music culture into this as well. How are the Beatles involved with Tavistock, for example? Because I think that's important.
Well,
that's important.
In the 60s, the Tavistock Institute and mass media and EMI Records, which was basically a vehicle of MI6. Let's just be real about it. Basically saw La Dolce Vita and rebellion and hedonism, which was basically Brave New World, where the slaves like their slavery, and that they're entertained into submission and blind to their slavery.
Like an opiate.
Because, well, yes, because the Brave New World agenda can last centuries. All Brave New World is a replay of the Roman Empire that lasted for centuries, where the slaves were entertained and could go to the Colosseum and enjoy the party. But jackboot totalitarian 1984 rule does not last long. The Nazis, Imperial Japan, Fascist Italy did not last long. Communist Russia caved in finally too. Jackboot tyranny does not last long, like the Brave New World agenda, where the slaves agree with their slavery and like it. And so the Tavistock Institute was founded to promote that kind of totalitarian rule that's soft and fuzzy, warm. And in the 60s, in that year after the USS Liberty incident, they had to speed up the great social experiment that had begun intimately with the Beatles and British invasion and the folk movement and things in California tied to Laurel Canyon. And most of those bands were the children of military intel.
Really?
Those great bands. Oh yeah, man, Stephen Stills. A lot of them were very affluent kids. You know, Jim Morrison of the Doors was the son of Admiral Morrison and the Tonkin Bay incident to provoke the Vietnam War.
Folks, are you listening to this?
This was tied to Laurel Canyon. Look up Laurel Canyon and Dave's Web and read about 21 articles on Laurel Canyon, and you will see what really was happening and all these military intel kids that went on to be bands. And so basically at the Monterey Pop, all eyes of the world were on this hippie event of the counterculture that they had manufactured years ahead, and their intent was to produce in the summer of love an indoctrination into Brave New World and destroy the family even more, and the 60s counterculture to split families even more. And they took these affluent kids of the 60s and indoctrinated them, and they bust in kids for this big free concert, like numbering about 200,000 kids from Canada and America, and over 1 million hits of Sandoz grade LSD, which had been illegal for over a year, magically made its way into the Bay Area for Monterey Pop when the Western world was indoctrinated, and filming of that very carefully was done to promote the 60s counterculture and the split in generations and rebellion against authority, and to discredit the anti-war movement by putting dirty hippies in there, you know. And it was an image thing too. But ultimately, on that, just 10 days after the USS Liberty incident, all eyes were on California and the Monterey Pop, because all mass media turned to it. And they brought over Hendrix and The Who and bands like the Animals that had all been MK'd in the Tavistock Institute in London. And over in America, they brought over a lot of Laurel Canyon-related bands, you know, like the Mamas and Papas and other ones, to play at that big concert. And in June, 46 years ago roughly, the world was indoctrinated into Brave New World, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and their soma was LSD.
And that LSD was where the LSD originated from our own governments.
LSD was invented by Sandoz Laboratories and Albert Hoffman, a chemist there. But it was very quickly grabbed up on and used in mind control experiments in the 50s for MK Ultra on victims and military at that time. But it expanded its use. You know that Ken Kesey of the Merry Pranksters, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that was his experience of MK Ultra at the University of California in Los Angeles on LSD. You see, he was indoctrinated into MK Ultra that was being done on our universities back then, and he and his merry prankster pals were indoctrinated into some degrees of MK Ultra, into some trauma and MK with LSD, and then later on they were sent on a bus trip with a bunch of Sandoz acid to pollute America as the merry pranksters and have a meeting with Timothy Leary up there at Millbrook in upstate New York after he had departed Harvard. You know, Transactional Analysis in Psychology was authored by Leary.
Okay. All right.
CIA asset. But Leary was a CIA asset promoting that, and there was a be-in January of 1967 with Leary presiding as high priest of, you know, turn on, tune in, and drop out. But at the Monterey Pop Festival 46 years ago, over 1 million hits of pharmaceutical-grade LSD hit the Bay Area that no illegal makers of it, like the Bear said, you know, Augustus Housley could have manufactured that. It all got flooded in there. They bust in all these people to this big, giant concert running for 3 days on end. And they ran the Great Social Experiment until the year 1969 when they had to shut it down because it grew too big and got out of their control. And so they began shutting it down at Woodstock and then the murderous concert at Altamont in December of 1969 when Hell's Angels sacrificially murdered Meredith Hunter while the Stones sang Sympathy for the Devil. Everything I'm telling you can be confirmed.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so let's talk about that incident, if you don't mind. What happened there with the sacrifice, if you will?
Sure. Okay. The Great Social Experiment was authored and everything by EMI Records, MI6, and the Tavistock Institute. They took a band who'd come back from Hamburg in Germany. And Hamburg in Germany is known as the Reeperbahn city with a totally legal red light district. Reeperbahn means red light district in English. And a lot of the English bands who couldn't get gigs over there in that lame time lived over in Hamburg in the red light district around whores and dope and everything else under the sun. And they came back to England, and then they were grabbed up on by the big record labels tied to Tavistock, and they were indoctrinated. They were not that talented, so they had the fifth Beatle, EMI producer George Martin, creating a lot of those Beatles orchestrated sounds that grew, and then the authorization of those things. And they manufactured the Beatles as good cops, you know, nice guy images with long hair, but skinny and a little effeminate, and they made the bad guy images the Rolling Stones at the same time, you know, good cop, bad cop. And that was to give people a choice of what they liked, you know, the good boy or the bad boy image.
Interesting.
The British invasion, you know, but it was like good cop, bad cop. And it was pushed as, you know, these skinny, kind of effeminate-looking guys with long hair, and at the same time, on Carnaby Street, that was an MI5 front, they had all these fashions and skinny women looking a little masculine and boyish, like, you know, Twiggy and Jane Birkin and, you know, other women that were skinny models looking almost anorexic but boyish to create this transgender crossover game, while they had the effeminate-looking, long-haired guys, skinny, you know, so they could have the gender bender game going on with the British invasion and the mods. And then it got psychedelic because they went to the next phase of it, and they had to speed it up to take the world's eyes off the Israelis attacking the USS Liberty, to hush it up about attacking the Golan Heights that year. And also then the Monterey Pop, over 1 million hits of Sandoz, illegal acid, flooded the Bay Area. They busted in all these people for this 3-day concert and brought, you know, MK bands from England and MK bands, Laurel Canyon related, to that concert to perform and indoctrinate everybody into the summer of love, man, and slavery in the West, and soft, fuzzy, warm totalitarianism. And this is where I disagree with fear-mongering 1984 mongers, because you know what, man? We've been floating around in Brave New World since 1967 and the summer of love, man, and everything. And they just shoot some 1984 at people to inspire obedience to the ruling class.
Fear does inspire obedience,
Yes,
or
it
it's an
does.
artifact. Yes, okay.
But it's an artifact, and that kind of jackboot tyranny cannot last long. But man, the soft, fuzzy, warm totalitarianism, it lasts, and it has. It's continued in all its phases. But in '67, the great social experiment took off while the war in Vietnam raged. We had affluent, spoiled kids at universities burning draft cards and discrediting the anti-war movement. We had manufactured, controlled opposition provoking racial riots at Watts and the Black Panthers and things like that. You know, there was genuine activism, but there was a lot of controlled opposition, infiltration into it. Then by '69, a lot of people had become awakened that there was a bigger game going on, and that was the scary part. And the elites had to shut down the great social experiment. They had pulled off what they had wanted. And so they toned it down at Woodstock. And there's a big documentary about Woodstock, and they show all the concerts and the noise and the people there, you know, going to the restroom, running around naked. But what they don't show is that there were a lot of MI5, or rather MI6 and CIA agents all over spreading out dirty LSD at that concert, and they had people gated in where they couldn't go out. There were no restrooms. And so for people that were really there at Woodstock, it wasn't as happy as the film and propaganda about it and all. In fact, they were fenced in and given a lot of dirty LSD. A CIA operative, Wavy Gravy, told everybody how to trip and how much to take. You know, but they were shutting down the great social experiment that year. And then in December of 1969, they needed to take it down one more notch. So they had a big free concert at Altamont, and they brought the Rolling Stones over. But that year, they had killed one of the founding members, Brian Jones, in the swimming pool in July of 1969 and replaced him with guitarist Mick Taylor and all. And the Stones were scared. You damn right they were going to perform and do whatever their masters told them, because they took out Jones, you know, who joined the 27 Club that year, as a warning that they're going to do what their masters, who made them, wanted. And so they played Altamont, and the Rolling Stones had, magically, instead of normal security, the Hells Angels as security. And the Hells Angels did their Luciferian thing, and they killed young Meredith Hunter, a young black man, to provoke some race tension in America and send warning vibes, you know. And they murdered him while the Stones performed live Sympathy for the Devil.
Ladies and gentlemen, the gentleman that we are interviewing, Ricky Ray, has lived what he's talking about. He knows of which he speaks. I just want to reaffirm this. Former member of several secret societies. He certainly doesn't need our endorsement, but I've got to tell you, he's lived what he's speaking. He's lived it, and I find it interesting too, folks. You're gonna have to do your own research, but interesting. Jim Morrison died at age 27. Amy Winehouse at age 27. Janis Joplin at age 27. Anything there? I forgot about it. Yeah.
The 27 Club began when Robert Johnson, the father of rock and roll, the old Delta blues man, died because he had made that deal with the devil at the crossroads. And he died at age 27 when his ticket was up. And there are weird things even in music and entertainment where people died at the age of 27 before the great musicians like Jimmy, Janis, Brian Jones, Jim Morrison all died at the age of 27. You know, because 27, when you add 2 and 7 together, is the number 9. You know, and the Beatles sang about the number 9. You know, that's a Luciferian number.
Represent? Right.
It's a Luciferian number in Ezekiel 28. In Ezekiel 28, the fallen cherub of the angelic order is described as having stones, precious stones. 9 of those stones are mentioned.
Interesting.
And every one of those stones goes, and the last thing mentioned is that they're set in gold. That means 10 things are mentioned there. 9 stones, the number 9, and the 10th thing, meaning the wealth of earth, gold. And those 10 items are all the Sephiroth of the Kabbalah occult system. Every one of the stones matches one of the attributes of the Kabbalah.
Okay. Now, what significance is that? Again, for the listeners who are unfamiliar with the Kabbalah, the mystical aspects that we're talking about here, what's the significance of that?
Well, the Kabbalah was the system of occultism that made its way out of Babylon, going all the way back to Nimrod and Semiramis and Nimrod's father and everything, who begat Nimrod.
Okay.
And he was a renegade, descendant of Ham after the flood, Cush. But the old word for Cush was chaos. That's what it means in the old language, the word chaos. And so Cush, chaos, gave birth to his son, who became the first king of empire, Nimrod. Out of chaos came order. Ordo ab chao. You know, the 33rd degree of Freemasonry. And he set up the mystery rites with his wife and mommy, Semiramis. And all. He set up the kingdoms of Assyria and Babylon. This goes back a long ways in time. But out of those mystery rites that took different forms in Egypt and Greece and other empires, the Kabbalah was a pervading occult system, and when the Jews went apostate and rejected their Messiah, they embraced the Kabbalah and the magic of Babylon and the mystery rites and everything. And their tree of life is really a model of the Gnostic tree of knowledge and everything. And the 10 Sephiroth, or globes of light, are the 9 stones and gold of trade and commerce that rule the earth today, that are the description of Lucifer in Ezekiel 28.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Pretty heavy
that's
stuff
how
here.
Yeah, and so you as Christians ought to know where the Kabbalah came from. The attributes of the Kabbalah are those 9 stones that are mentioned in Ezekiel 28.
Why does, for example, we hear Madonna going on The View and talking about, well, I follow the Kabbalah. Why? What's going on here with people like Madonna and other high-profile people saying that they follow the Kabbalah or they're into the Kabbalah? What's up with that?
Well, the Kabbalah continued, and it pervaded the nice side of it into the New Age movement, and all that goes back a long ways in time. You have to understand that a lot of the 1800s that produced actually the New Age movement in Helena Blavatsky, the other part of it, everybody knows that she was into Eastern occultism and Eastern mysticism, but she was also an Eastern Star Freemason, and so was her partner Alcott and the other ones that created the Theosophical Society. In fact, a lot of Masonic events happened in the 1800s that affect us today. Like in the 1830s, a guy named Russell and his compatriots got a charter from the splinter of the Illuminati in Germany and came back and started the Skull and Bones death cult at Yale University. Later on, in Freemasonry, one of the guys that instigated the Civil War, Albert Pike, started the KKK. Another high-ranking Freemason named Joseph Smith and his Masonic brother started the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. And Eastern Star, Helena Blavatsky, started the Theosophical Society. And Pike and his Jewish Masonic brother Nathan Bedford Forrest created the KKK. And over in Europe, Mazzini, an Illuminist and head of Freemasonry in Italy, started the Mafia. Mazzini is the M in Mafia. So
Really?
all of these things were Masonically rooted events, and Freemasonry is a religion, but it also plays with the Kabbalah.
Okay, all right, I
It's
get that.
occult system.
Now,
Yeah.
because of time and as we progress, you've given us so much information here. And folks, I would urge everyone to do your own research. Ricky Ray talked about the book, The Pink Swastika. Please, folks, certainly grab a copy of that. You can get it used on Amazon. But let me ask you a question here that's on my mind. And in fact, it was on my mind when you and I spoke off air earlier. MTV, the 1980s. I remember when my son was born. My son's sitting, 12 feet from me. I remember when he was born.
Mm-hmm.
It was MTV generation. I remember MTV, becoming of age, and I remember looking at this and thinking, there's just something not right about this. At first it was glitzy and glamoury, but what is? Talk to me about the MTV in the 80s.
Okay, let's talk about it. We know that the Great Social Experiment shut down in the year 69, pretty much. But there was still a lot of activism, and it's important for me to pick up the thread there. The next year to shut it down, and shut down activism especially, was at Kent State. 10 soldiers and Nixon coming, 4 dead in Ohio. See, what happened was there was still activism against the war in Vietnam, and so they used a little jackboot fear-mongering and took out some students there at Kent State. I had a college teacher who was actually a student at Kent State in '70 when that happened, and watched them die when National Guardsmen shot students. But what that served as notice was if they got a little bit too out of sorts, they could get capped. And also there was a little fear-mongering there to finally shut down a lot of the counterculture. Well, it didn't work. What happened was it angered a lot of people, like Neil Young, who wrote Ohio, and a lot of activism kind of boosted. And so they realized that the jackboot way didn't work so good. So they had to come in from a different angle, which was seduction. Much more effective. So Vietnam went on after Watergate, and then it shut down in the year 75, and the draft ended. But at the same time, mass media was celebrating the end of Vietnam, the draft is over, people were coming home, these kids were all graduating from college, and now they weren't as interested in activism because it was boring, their little affluent butts. So they had to have something now that they had graduated and all. They could still have long hair and bell-bottoms, but it was polyester suits and stacked shoes at that time. And to give them entertainment, since the war was over, and so activism was replaced by hedonism. And in that year, you saw the birth of tons of FM radio that took over, because the big labels couldn't take over AM radio that was news-oriented to the public. So they got their foot in and bought out FM radio and these long, droning sets that bragged all the time, no news here. Well, that was because they had bought them out and were just running all this long, droning music and everything for escapism and hedonism. And as that generation had grown and graduated, then they could sell out to the man now, and no war protesting and hedonism. So they provided them arena rock, which grew immediately at that time, at the same time of the rise of FM radio. And at the same time, disco came out of the gay community and became a form of entertainment for all the hippies, now become yuppies on the weekend. And now all the dope, instead of psychedelics that opened the mind, became highly addictive forms of dope like, China white heroin, expensive cocaine, and prescription speed out the gazoo. Even truckers tripping on it, going down the highway on Benzedrine and Black Beauties. See, America was shifting in a subtle way because the violent act of Kent State didn't work. It aroused more public anger and antipathy towards the war, so they had to come in with subtle seduction, and they did. when the war was over, man, and all the young people grew up and graduated, they weren't interested in activism anymore, but they had to have something. Now they're working for the man. They could still have long hair and bell-bottoms and polyester suits, but they had arena rock to go to, you know, big concerts, multi-million-dollar concert tours, man, and there wasn't an agenda behind that in the 70s. I'm 55 now. I watched that go down, and because I was attached to it, I knew what was going on, man. It was bogus. You know?
Disco.
And they were, yeah, disco was given, and it came out of the gay community and the bathhouses of the gay community, which was very underground, and they promoted it with the famous movie Saturday Night Fever, and macho, butch gay John Travolta was playing the working guy that goes to Studio 54, which had become a hanger-on place for old depraved decadents of the 60s like Andy Warhol and Mick Jagger, you know. And they all got into disco and all so that they could work their 9-to-5 jobs in their office and whatever and go to the disco and party on the weekends, you know. And so Saturday Night Fever was released at the same time, and you can hang out with old gay people to this day, and they will identify all the gay symbols all through Saturday Night Fever, and they would tell you flat out that John Travolta is part of the butch, macho gay culture, not the effeminate, soft gay side. It's that macho side. It's a real aggressive one. And America was being seduced into apathy in the 70s. In the year 1981, they linked up the big labels with TV and created MTV to really indoctrinate people. And that was the year that Reagan took over in Reaganomics. And so they had to create a controlled opposition game of plastic rebellion using MTV as the vehicle to indoctrinate. So if kids were rebellious and didn't like authority, they had control of them through MTV. And I watched my entire generation clone off in the way they dressed, talked, acted, hairstyles from 1981 to the end of 1983. Cloned off, completely unaware, and if they liked the pop or the new wave stuff, they were looking like the Flock of Seagulls or Michael Jackson or Madonna. Or if they liked metal, they had Headbangers Ball for guys in spandex and leather and spikes. You know, and some of them guys were, you know, presenting like satanic imagery and everything, and stuff like when thrash metal came along and stuff by the mid-'80s.
Now, before we get into that, okay, you said MTV and cloning off. I think a lot of people don't understand the real serious nature of MTV and the cloning off of children. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. Basically what it is they used a very sophisticated form of mind programming that we call neuro-linguistic programming, but they went a little further than that, and you can read about that kind of subtle mind control in guys like Anthony Robbins' books and everything. In fact, neuro-linguistic programming is very out of date, and all that's been long gone. But MTV used repeated and timed images and sounds to subtly hypnotize and bring people into that and seduce them even further than FM radio and arena rock and discos had done in the 70s, late after Vietnam. But it was all a step-by-step process from the great social experiment of the 60s to bring us more concretely into Brave New World. So the neocon conservatives rose out of Reaganomics that was destroying the economy and the deregulation that's got us really screwed right now. But on the other side, they had Plastic Rebellion on MTV to further divide the family. And it was so bad. I mean, I watched my generation clone off, and I was a single parent. My son was born in June 1980. And I watched my generation clone off so hard by 83, I destroyed my last TV. I have never owned a TV since.
Congratulations.
And I would look at my son, holding him in my arms, thinking, if my generation cloned off the way they talk, look, hairstyles, fashions from that stuff on MTV, what's going to happen to your generation? Now they're all in their early 30s, a lot of them with the depth of a wading pool, and clueless that they're slaves. And all, but hey, as long as they got the party of sex, drugs, rock and roll, the unholy trinity, keep on coming, you know. They like their slavery. And they will rat out people who tell the truth.
Speaking of ratting out people, is it true, Mr. Ray, that and folks folks that know about what we're speaking of will understand this question. If you don't, you can do your own research on this. But is it true that a secret meeting was held by music labels back in the early 90s to promote, for example, rap music? And was it, for example, and then a follow-up to that question, too, is it true that these labels, these very labels, also owned, and get this, private prisons? Just a couple of questions to throw out there.
Well, they're all tied. If you look at the corporate end of things, and you will find the big labels are tied to big corporate mass media interests like Sumner Redstone and Viacom, which is MTV. You know, and
wow.
The big labels are all tied to that. You know, and people that play around with YouTube, if they put music up and everything, they'll get a copyright violation from either UMG Universal or Sony or Warner Brothers or EMI or these big labels. And here's the kicker. A lot of what people think are independent or underground labels, if you look on those CDs and flip them over, you will see their distributor is one of those big labels. And basically they use a lot of independent labels to feel out the public and experiment with sounds and indoctrination, and then they will sign people on and create changes in culture from these independent labels that they have and control world distribution. And you can look on records even back in the 70s and the 80s that seemed independent, but if their distribution was one of those big labels, then you know that they were a puppet of the big labels. And the 80s was a real weird thing because that was a producer's era where it wasn't the band anymore. In fact, you could take two bands like, say, Def Leppard or AC/DC and listen to them, but man, they sounded so much alike. You flip the record over, it was the same producer, Mutt Lange, or Bob Rock, or one of these things, and you could take albums and listen to them where they all sounded the same and put a stack of them together, and you would find the same big label producers produce the ones that all sounded alike, because the technology was there for them to control it, and it was really the producer and engineer more than the band. And the technology has just rose, like with the Antares Auto-Tune that came out in the 90s. Somebody could talk into it and come out sounding like they were singing Angel.
Yeah.
You know?
This is where I've grown up in the music from the 90s, and I've noticed since then, even now, the love songs that are being sung on the radio. I mean, they used to sing songs like, they used to sing songs about God, even in the early 90s, all the time. Now, the love songs that I hear being played on the top 40 charts seem like they're singing to entities or the devil himself.
Well, they do. And all because he will appear as an angel of light. And that's part of the New Age movement, is the white light side of occultism that looks really nicey nice and everything, where most people, when they think of the occult, they think of the dark side of the force like Darth Vader. But it isn't that way, man. And all, it's Gnostic dualism and everything. And a lot of people think that the ruling elites are all on the left-hand path. But they're not, man. Gnostic dualism is controlling the right-hand path and the white light side as well as the dark side. And that is why the Masonic symbol is the chessboard that's black and white. And so the nicey nice stuff in pop music is the white light New Age side, essentially.
And I want to ask a question that one of the listeners posed. Christian music. Is there Christian music? Yeah, that plays into their
like
agenda.
Debbie Boone and everything, the son of evangelist guy, Pat Boone, who was a manufactured pop star in the doo-wop era. Yeah, that little song about the light that she sang about that seemed like a love song, man, that was the songwriter of that song was writing about Lucifer as the angel of light. Yeah,
are all these are all these songwriters? Yeah, what I'm hearing here, are all these songwriters specifically because of your music background here, are they in? They're all in on this together? I mean, is this what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Yeah, anything tied to the big labels and everything. Listen, man, you don't get a big label contract without selling your soul. You know, even some pop stars have admitted that they literally did sell their soul to be on that big label, signed on. You know, because you're a slave to that system. And even the guy, John Todd, for all his flaws, exposed the deeper side of the music industry in the 70s, telling people a lot of things that just were like bad science fiction, but now time has borne out that he was telling a lot of truth.
Well, it reminds me of something. I think it was Kate Perry. I'm not sure the singer who said, "I sold my soul to the devil."
Oh yeah, she'd been in gospel music. Yeah.
Wow. Okay,
yes,
so
sir.
so what we're seeing here, if I'm looking, or if I'm understanding this, if Joe and I are understanding this correctly, we're seeing this architecture that is being built by the people, by the real power brokers in the world they're infiltrating our music, our entertainment, every aspect of society, but in particular
they're not
the music.
Infiltrating it. They did this a long time ago.
So they're here.
You know, they've been here, man. And all this has been going on since World War II, man. The evangelical movement was infiltrated effectively, and that's where I would step on some toes for people that think very highly of some very famous evangelists at that time, without the knowledge that some of them were very high Freemasons and working for the Illuminists and some corrupt things going on and all, and became manufactured religious superstars. You know,
well, I got to tell you,
I named names on my old website. It got me in a lot of trouble with a lot of church bangers, right?
Well, you know what? Here's the thing, Mr. Ray. What we're after is the truth. Okay, so if the truth, look, if the truth indicts someone, it's the way it is. What about Oral Roberts, for example? What can you tell us about Oral Roberts, the very well-respected evangelist back in the day? Wasn't he associated? Wasn't there some controversy with him?
Well, I'll just shoot you the whole picture, man. In the 40s, TV was confiscated from the Nazis, which was used in the 30s to indoctrinate them to be a psychopathic nation for war with no conscience. They had been indoctrinated with TV in the 30s. We took that technology and figured out how to make it cheaply and get it out all over. And so by 1948, everybody could have a TV and afford it in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, and America. And so the architects of the Brave New World or New World Order paradigm were busy. And in the 50s, they manufactured teenage culture and rebellion with the Blackboard Jungle and the rise of rock and roll as a rebellious thing, in the Blackboard Jungle, and Rebel Without a Cause in 55. But in the evangelical movement, the second wave of Pentecostals and then the evangelical movement, a lot of them that we call the charismatics, they were infiltrated. And in the year 1949, Illuminist William Randolph Hearst and mass media financed a gigantic media blitz to turn a seemingly unknown minister into a religion superstar who just happened to be a Freemason named Billy Graham. And they manufactured that big L.A. thing of these big giant tent revivals, and he got his Masonic brothers in the show with him. Those two Masonic brothers who rose to 33rd degree like him were Oral Roberts and Robert Schuller of the Crystal Cathedral. All 33rd degree Freemasonry, and that is by invitation only to get the 33rd degree. There have been multi-generational Freemasons at the 32nd degree, like Senator Mike Enzi from Wyoming, who would give his eyes teeth to be a 33rd degree invitation only Freemasonry guy. But no, these religious guys got that invitation. Why? Because when manufactured wars for profit fail, when economic chaos fails, there will be religion. The one world religion that points to Antichrist. And that's why the infiltration of the evangelical movement began earnestly in that year, 1949, after TV, to indoctrinate. And, of course, radio, big tent revivals that were financed by these Freemasonic entities for the Crown Corporation and many other agendas behind it happened in the 50s and the second wave of it. But by the 60s and the birth of the megachurch through guys like Chuck Smith and everything, and a New Ager counterculture guy named Lonnie Frisbee infiltrated the evangelical movement, bringing the New Age movement and the white light occultism of the Beatles and Stones and all that into the evangelical movement and the charismatics as we know them. And, of course, there was one guy that rose up who kept talking over and over about his mentors, Oral Roberts and Kenneth Hagin, who was a 33rd degree Freemason down there in Oklahoma. And that guy was Kenneth Copeland, 33rd degree Freemason. And a couple other evangelicals that were complicit in murders in the 60s and all from different bents of religion and all to get that 33rd degree invitation were also members of the Boule, or the black version of Skull and Bones. And that was Jesse Jackson, 33rd degree Freemason, who was complicit in the murder of Martin Luther King. And then on the Nation of Islam side in the black community, in all, Louis Farrakhan, 33rd degree Freemason, member of Boule, was complicit in the murder of Malcolm X. To infiltrate towards the one world religion. You
Ladies
asked,
and gentlemen,
I told you.
yeah, I'm gonna tell you, Mr. Ray. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope the words of Mr. Ray are resonating with you. And I will tell you this, definitely this is a broadcast you're going to have to listen to again and again, because the amount of information which he is imparting to you is unbelievably deep. It's things that you're going to have to do research on yourself as well to verify. But I've got to say that we seek the truth wherever it leads. We don't care. I mean, you can't change facts, and this is why I've got an immense respect for Mr. Ray. And I was just accused here a couple of different emails saying, well, you're anti-Jewish and you're anti-Christian or anti-Catholic and anti-this and anti-that. There's three different emails here. Meaning me for having, or Joe and I for having you on. Okay. Obviously, by extension, they're accusing you of being anti-Jewish. I want you to answer that, if you don't mind. On the other side of the break here, we have to take a very short break. We're going to be right back after these messages, because a lot of people get that screwed up. A lot of people take what you're saying and twist it and don't understand exactly what you're saying. I know what you're saying, but they don't. So on the other side of the break, I'd like you to just address that very briefly. Folks, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report, a very special Wednesday edition, the 29th day of May, 2013. We're very, very blessed to have with us Mr. Ricky Ray. Folks, what a show. We're right back after these short messages. Stay with us.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour. This Wednesday, May 29th, 2013, of the Hagman and Hagman Report with our very special guest, Mr. Ricky Ray. And for those of you who joined us late, you got to go back and listen to the beginning to hear who he is. He is a very well-versed, well-knowledge man of the satanic agenda and how it has manifested itself into all aspects and layers of our society through subtlety, and is overtaking humans without them even really knowing it in most cases.
During the break, during the break, Joe said something to me, and I just want him to read the Bible verse, dead center in the Bible. Go ahead and read that. Do you have it with you right handy?
Yeah. The middle verse of the Bible, Psalms 118, verse 8. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man.
There you go. See, and we need to understand that, because before the break we were talking about the accusations of being anti-Jewish and being anti-this and being anti-that. Mr. Ray, just address that on our behalf. What are you saying here? You're not indicting Jewry or your Judeo-Christian, anything Judeo-Christian, right?
No, and I'm not indicting the Catholics per se. But what I will tell you is religious organizations at the lower levels, including priests and rabbis, are often clueless about what their overlords in these religious organizations are really up to. In fact, it echoes almost the trappings of secret societies like Freemasonry that deliberately disinform their lower-ranked initiates about what's really going on until they rise up the food chain and their loyalty is tested. And then as they come up the food chain, they understand that there's a lot more going on than just a fraternal order with charities like you see with the Shriners and the Shriners Hospital and things like that, that there's something way deeper going on tied into politics and world economy and global agendas, and that Freemasonry is a religion of Gnostic dualism, of both the right-hand path and the left-hand path together controlling that, and the people lower don't necessarily know what's really going on because they have been deliberately disinformed. And unfortunately, this has gone on with the Vatican for a very long time, but within Jewry and everything, they hold to the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, and its writings and its commentaries, the Mishnah and the Midrash, and the Zohar, which is the root of the Kabbalah, far more than they actually adhere to the Torah, which will sit in a synagogue rolled up, but not necessarily really read or used or embraced within Judaism.
Yeah, and
I know
actually,
that's controversial, but if you talk to people in these organizations, they will tell you what they actually find. And how I knew about this was because, one, I know a Catholic priest who's a dear friend who was a chaplain in the American prison systems and didn't feed into the politics of the Vatican, but as he grew and learned more, then he found out that there was a lot that he didn't want to be a part of. At the same time, I knew a man, a rabbi who's out in Des Plaines, who was also a chaplain in the prison system, and that kept him off the main track of his religion in organized Judaism and the Hasidim and the Chabad Lubavitch. And so, as a chaplain, both these men were away at lower ranks, away from the politics, but every time they got closer to the politics, they found more and more things that were really scary, and they're at a point in their life now where they're either going to have to depart from it to do what God wants them to do, or they can stay in it and sell their soul. And I know that sounds awfully hard. I'm not against Jewish people, nor am I against Catholics, but the Vatican and the Zionist agendas that are cloaking that in everything, because God's conditions to the Jewish people were conditional based on their obedience to the law and the covenant that he made with them, and for a very long time they have been disobedient. And
okay, wow.
And when you look into their doctrines, you find that Judaism as a religion is not based on the Torah or the writings or the prophets that Christianity embraces. But
right.
But the Vatican also long departed from the ways of God too, at the highest levels.
Are we not talking about cognitive dissonance here when we're talking about this?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just explain a little bit about that? Because I think people need to hear a little bit about cognitive dissonance. Go ahead.
In psychology, when people hear something that they don't agree with or they don't like, or it hits their buttons, then what happens is they will set up a psychic guard against it to shut it out. and all, and that's called cognitive dissonance because it goes against the fairy tales that they want to believe. And it can be the real truth, but because it goes against what they have been socialized from infancy to believe is true, then they will put up a guard against it, and it rattles against them, and you can't help these people when they're putting up cognitive dissonance against the truth, even though they could do it, but it goes against the fairy tales that they were indoctrinated to believe from childhood, and so you're breaking through a lot of years of conditioning and socialization that causes the cognitive dissonance, and it's almost like dealing with alcoholics in recovery or addicts in NA and AA, that you cannot help anyone in recovery unless they want to help themselves. And that's the bottom line, man.
You know what, Mr. Ray? If I can just interject one thing here, and ladies and gentlemen,
sure.
I'll just share. Just humor me for 1 minute here. I think my first adult experience with cognitive dissonance occurred when, as an investigator, new investigator, essentially, back in the early 80s, I was tasked with the investigation of the brutal stabbing death of my uncle. My uncle was a guy who I respected. He was a school teacher. He was a member of the community held in high esteem. I knew him all my life. He did things for me that I could never repay. And I saw his body lying in his bed, blood-spattered walls, ceiling, drapes. It was one of the most heinous, brutal crimes I've ever seen. And it was at that time I learned that he led a homosexual lifestyle. He was a homosexual, and he led a lifestyle like, that would be equivalent to looking for Mr. Goodbar, for example. That, yes. I could not accept that. Mentally, it was so difficult to accept. And to me, that's when the dose of reality struck me right between the eyes. And sometimes, when people you hold in high esteem and you learn something like this, it's hard to accept. And you have this mental battle with yourself. But I just wanted to just share that with you and the audience. It's just something that's very difficult to accept sometimes.
Yes. These things are hard for a lot of people to accept. I had gotten into secret societies at a early point in life, and I got deeply involved with them. And then a few things shook me, One was the Karen Silkwood incident, and what a fellow Wyomingite, Jerry Spence, uncovered, and the Spence team. And people like me who worked in the nuclear industry at that time were called, and we gave testimony or signed depositions, and we got blackballed from the nuclear industry and pursued for years by Kerr McGee. And when my cousins came home from Vietnam, who had been in the Phoenix program and in Green Beret and SEAL, each respectively, they threw this book at me as a young teenager called None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen, and told me to read it and not go into the military before the war was over with. And they had come back from Vietnam, had been tied to the CIA Phoenix program, and they were never the same.
That's one of the best books.
One cousin never adjusted to society, and he took his life in 1996 with a .357 Magnum to the heart. The other one died from Agent Orange poisoning and cancer in the year 2005 when I walked away from all secret societies and the intel community.
My goodness. You've had you've had it all. I mean, you've seen it from the inside. You've had the personal experiences. You've been involved in the secret societies. Where are we right now, Mr. Ray? I mean,
we are seconds to midnight. To the American evangelical movement and all, man, you know what? Playtime is over. Being a church banger in the fashion show and the evangelical movement, like it's been all warm and fuzzy, that's over. After 9/11, America effectively became empire, not republic. I hate to tell you guys, But that's just how it is. And denial is an acrostic for don't even know I am lying. You see, that's what denial really happens. It's an acrostic for don't even know I am lying. And when we lie to ourselves and have cognitive dissonance and we don't like the truth, we got the problem. And we can either take the blue pill and get high and wake up and believe anything we want to, or we can take the red pill of truth, which is like the scroll that the prophet was told to eat, and it was sweet in his mouth, but when it hit his gut, it was really sour and bitter. And that's how truth can be sometimes.
Well, indeed.
Yeah.
I've got an email here that somebody asked, please, if we could ask you, sir, what you know about Keith Green and Bob Dylan. Both seemingly had something to do with the vineyard. Is that something that you can talk about?
Well, Keith Green was a young evangelical. He died, oddly, but he was touched by a lot of the stuff that came out of young Lonnie Frisbee. Lonnie Frisbee was like a young hippie and everything that became an evangelical and born again, but he was tied to the 60s counterculture, and through him and his partners, they brought a little of that new age counterculture into the evangelical movement, and money-making greed guys like Chuck Smith saw the potential of it and gave birth to the mega churches in the evangelical movement. Keith Green, as a young minister, saw it, touched it, but did not partake. He died, and he was a good man. Bob Dylan, on the other hand, flat out said in a TV interview who he sold his soul to, and yes, he touched Christianity and a little bit of the evangelical movement, but he departed.
Jeez.
You know, but Keith Green,
okay.
He was one of the good guys. You know, there were some good men. Even though they were touched by it, they kind of had long hair like the early 70s and 60s, but they didn't sell out to the man, and they wouldn't have taken part in the mega churches. Keith Green was one of those men. Rest in peace. He's on the other side with God, as far as I'm concerned. I know about him well. And I know about the charismatics because I took a break from it when my son was born in 1980, and I wanted to raise him right, and I attended a church with some locals that I didn't know that they had devolved into a very cult-like charismatic thing, and I did that with trying to be a young single parent with my son for a while. It didn't work, and I didn't know how deeply the American charismatic movement had been infiltrated until I left it. I walked away, and it sucked so bad. I went back to the dark side of the force, man, and I was straight up honest about it. And I scared the bejesus out of a lot of people because I was very highly ranked in these secret societies on places, you know, like the Word Council of Nine and some other high things and all. And the more I rose up in the secret societies, I found how connected they all were, you know. And I became an automatic member of other ones that I hadn't even touched because I thought they didn't like each other until I rose up high and found out they were buddy-buddy.
Okay. Wow.
And all, and that's just how it is, and all. And I walked away from the evangelical movement in the 80s because the charismatic movement was infiltrated with a lot of New Age activity, a lot of cult activity, even degrees of mind control and propaganda. And it had become very toxic by the 80s. And it rose up with the neocons professing to be Christians on one side, and then you had Plastic Rebellion of MTV, but that was controlled opposition. It was like a puppet master that has on his right hand a Republican puppet, and on the other hand, he has a Democrat puppet at war with each other, and the audience just sees the two puppets at war with each other, and they can choose sides, not knowing the puppet master behind it who's laughing all the way to the bank.
It's a magic show. I mean, it's theater.
And that's what oligarchy or shadow government is really all about, and that's what animates the world in the Western Hemisphere is shadow government or oligarchy that rules behind their presidents, their prime ministers, or their popes, or their revs.
And that's right. And folks, this is why you should be listening to this gentleman today. This is why we're seeing what we're seeing today. This is why we're on the precipice of a third world war. This is why people have no clue what's going on.
Part of the reason, yeah, I agree. And I'd like to ask you...
We're on the edge of Ezekiel 38, and World War III must be the chaos that comes to destroy the eco-balance and turn the world into the nightmarish landscape that the world will cry out for an answer, and then a man is going to come who has all the answers. And we know who he is, with 3 numbers. And those letters are Chi, Z, and stigma in Greek, not numbers. 666. They are the Greek letters Chi, Z, and stigma. And the middle one is shaped like a snake, meaning to break up and to disarm. The Antichrist, we are not far.
If we were and this is me asking this question, if I were to look at London, for example, and maybe some of the occupants of London City, would I be too far off from the root of the Antichrist, we'll say?
Well, no, because you have, remember that in Ezekiel and prophecies talk about the beast that has to take out 3 horns and all to rule. And I believe 100% that those 3 horns that will be supplanted are Vatican City, one world religion, the City of London within London, one world economy, and the District of Columbia within Washington, D.C., Masonic architecture, the military side of it. And in Washington, D.C., they have a different constitution that you can see online. They have a flag that has 3 stars on it, and all, meaning Vatican City, the City of London, and Washington, D.C. And these 3 things will be supplanted by the rule of the Antichrist. And I believe these are the 3 horns as independent polis or city-states that are independent with their own constitutions, not of Rome and Italy for Vatican City, not of London and England for the City of London within London, and finance and war as cat's paw for the City of London and Vatican City that the United States has become.
Interesting.
And if you look at the flag of the District of Columbia, you'll see those 3 stars and stripes on it. And you can look online and find it has its own constitution, not our constitution.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
Is our country over? Is the USA done for? The ideology, the Norman Rockwell USA, I mean, is this gone forever?
Well, I think Norman Rockwell's been dead and buried since the 50s and the Blackboard Jungle in 55, to be straight with you, or the first Playboy magazine in 1953 from CIA asset Hugh Hefner that I exposed in an article on them, and the first public MK Ultra kitten, Marilyn Monroe, their first centerfold. And there wasn't an agenda. Look, you know, Playboy magazine isn't soft porn like people think. It's a catalog where the rich and wealthy can look at the pretty girls and use it from their pimp Hefner to get girls for their game. And all, it's an order catalog of the elites. It's not a soft porn magazine. And it came out in the 50s when MK Ultra came out and the birth of Bilderberg.
You know something?
These things are all tied.
I got to tell you something. You mentioned the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy. I love the book. I've got a friend who knows Gary Allen, knew Gary Allen. You know, it's such an important book. But you mentioned Playboy too. You know, as a kid, of course, you know, in this growing up in the 60s, it was always, you know, get a Playboy. And what an impact that one magazine had on our culture, the fabric of our society. Not a good impact, obviously, but holy cow. But so you're saying, though, this is part the CIA attack?
Yeah, it's really a catalog showing pretty MK'd girls, monarch beta, sex kittens, and all, as centerfolds that the elites can all pick and choose. and it's really a mail-order catalog to Pimp Hefner, a CIA asset for a very long time and well protected. And as controlled opposition, his buddy, Gloria Steinem, another CIA asset, who was also, worked for Playboy and then opposed it all as a feminist later to divide America and destroy the family. So
they're doing
I
a
believe
good job of that.
The 50s was when Norman Rockwell died. But we've been on our way. But, despite its flaws, the United States is the last haven of real republic and democracy on planet Earth and justice, despite its many flaws. And this is why the New World Order people are working relentlessly to destroy the United States from within through decadence and depravity like Rome. Because when we go, they can have their one world government. And we are the last haven of what real democracy should have been and real republic in the highest eyes of men like Solon and others.
Mr.
But
Ray,
when they take us out, it's going down.
What can we expect in the near future with the United Nations and the setting up of the one world religion? And you talked about this earlier, different factions of Judaism to Christianity to Islam all believe that there is a coming Messiah. The UN promotes this idea that there will be a world teacher that is the Christ that is coming.
Well,
How close are they to their goals?
Well, they're actually pretty close because they're breaking down things. In the year 2012 at Lambeth in Castle in England, the sycophant and guy who presided over the occult royal wedding, Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who was an initiated Druid in the year 2002, had a big One World conference meeting that wasn't too publicized, and he was in his purple robes talking about One World religion, and you can see videos of it on YouTube at Lambeth, and with him was Queen Elizabeth in a scarlet dress and hat. Scarlet and purple. Where have we heard that? Revelation 17, Mystery Babylon. And they were talking with 9 world religions there for this little summit at Lambeth, pressing towards that. And right after that, he made a visit to the Vatican and hung out with his Masonic pal of the papal black nobility, Pope Benedict, who was head of the Inquisition for many years, pressing the Vatican mandate against, sex crimes and things like that. Joseph Ratzinger, who was Hitler Youth.
Wow.
And he was buddy-buddy with him, and those videos can be seen on that. But Lambeth, look up Lambeth, and you will see him address all these religions in unity with Queen Elizabeth, meaning the crown is corporation, and sitting there quietly watching who rules behind Elizabeth, none other than Prince Philip, the consort prince, who has truly ruled behind Elizabeth and is the crown and the real royal and the power behind the throne since 1953, because he was complicit in what set her up to be queen in 1953 with the Queen Mother.
Okay, boy, you brought up some good things here, and I'm dying to ask you this because I've been studying, and folks, regular listeners to this show know that one of my key points of research were the 2012 Olympics, the ceremonies, opening and closing ceremonies, and right from the start, obviously, it was so out of place. You had Queen Elizabeth coming in with John D. And parachuting down to Earth, if you will, or parachuting down. What can you tell us about the occult symbolism or the play that became the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics relative to what's going on today?
Well, the Olympics was one faction of the black nobility. The Olympics went back as entertainment, even in ancient Greece, to distract people. And the entertainment industry continued in the Empire of Rome to distract people from real situations, to be entertained and distracted from real political events and not to get involved, to keep their hands out of it and enjoy the party. And so Olympics and plays and entertainment existed. In fact, theater rose out of Greece, along with sports in the Olympics, as we know them. And it went and took a more dark and perverse form in Rome as empire, with the Colosseums and entertainment that got more and more perverse and more expensive to entertain the people, because they got jaded, and that's what contributed to the collapse of Rome as empire, because it got too costly to maintain the entertainment to keep them pacified until it cratered from within. And that's what's happening to America today. It's getting too expensive for them to keep everybody pacified and entertained. They have to come up with bigger and bigger spectacles. And the 2012 Olympics were, yes, occult from the get-go, with Druid rites and, fires and things like that. But that was also the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth and 60 years on the throne from 53, and all this kind of business. The Diamond Jubilee was when, in 2012, when they had the World Religion Conference in Lambeth, but that didn't make a lot of mass media. And then later, the big rites for Queen Elizabeth and the Diamond Jubilee, and there's one where she gave a speech, and right behind her was seated the third man in red, the Duke of Kent, the Grand Master of Freemasonry, Scottish and York Rite since 1967, just sitting there with a very satisfied smile while she talks and thanks the people for military service and all this good stuff and war and peace. And he's just sitting behind there because he, with Philip, ruled behind her. And so you got a lot of power of oligarchy behind even the Queen. And she has flat said in her 80s now that she cannot rule without Philip behind her, because he has been who's ruled behind her all this time. And now
I understand
his son,
that, right.
William Arthur Philip Louis Mountbatten, will take the throne. That's his whole name. William Arthur, the King Arthur thing.
Right.
And then Louis Philip.
This is to establish a Camelot, if you will, or as I see it, and correct me here, Mr. Ray. Okay, are we not seeing the reestablishment of the British Empire? So the sun never sets on the British throne, British Empire.
Even in America, the CIA and FBI have been the cat's paw of MI6 and MI5 a long time. In other words, the old story about the cat's paw, where the monkey sees chestnuts roasting on an open fire. He doesn't want to reach in the fire to get them, so he grabs a cat and uses his paws into the fire to get the walnuts out so he can eat them, and he splits and leaves the cat with burnt paws. Well, this is how the Crown as a corporation and MI6 has used the CIA to take the heat, or the FBI and the intel community, while it's really the masterminds and the Crown as corporation and MI6 as the monkey, using the CIA as the cat's paw to take the heat and do the thug work. You see, the District of Columbia was designed to do the thug work of the Crown and the Vatican.
That's interesting. Now, time is running short. I want to get this in, and I don't know how much you want to disclose about this. You have a particular. Well, let me preface this by saying this. In 2012, we saw high-budget films, in 2013 as well, but films like Skyfall, films like the Batman. I can't. What's the name of that Batman movie? Dark Knight Rises. Okay. But that gave way to, I don't know, maybe Aurora. Now, you've got a special, right, you've got kind of a special relationship with Aurora. You want to share that with our audience?
Yes, I will. In the year 2012, I was at NAMM, and a lot of people don't know what NAMM is, but NAMM is a big music show in Anaheim, California, and then in January, and the whole music industry plans its year around the big NAMM shows, which are a big technology trade show that happen twice a year in January and July. And the fiscal year of the music industry works around that and all, and beginning in January. So that July, they had NAMM at Nashville. And I was coming home. We had attended NAMM over in Nashville and stopped up in Chicago to visit bros and friends from a lot of the old world, and was headed back on I-70, and I got a call from an old U.S. Secret Service agent who was a co-student of mine with a martial arts instructor who taught U.S. Secret Service agents the bodyguard trade once upon a time, and has taught U.S. Special Forces hand-to-hand close-quarters combat at Fort Benning in Georgia, SEALs and Green Beret. Anyway, he had talked to the teacher to run me down, and I got called to stop, and he said, in essence, another false flag has happened, but this one is very critical. And I got called in, and Aurora sits just east of downtown in Denver off I-70, so I go in there, and we just watch Homeland Security dressed as cops, groomed people being interviewed on mass media, telling about all these bad things that happened in Aurora, and this doped-up guy that they took away named James Holmes, whose daddy was breaking testimony on DARPA and some really nasty black technology, among other things. But I think Holmes disappeared and was set up to be captured as the fall guy so that it would shut his daddy up from telling about DARPA and all these other things. Anyway, the theater was not shot up to shreds like people thought, but inside there, after Homeland Security dressed cops and other people split, then what was there was a place that was not too shot up, but proof of over 70 people taken out by a very well-coordinated death crew of about 4 men that operate this way, and they came in and came out really quick around midnight when that movie was shown, and popped in several different things, like malls that have several different movie theaters in one building. Well, that's what it was, but several of the different theater sections were shot out, and these people were taken out very quickly, very efficiently, and then they found this doped-up guy, James Holmes, with a Glock 40 caliber pistol, which is very important because the 40 caliber was developed by the FBI with Winchester and unveiled in 1990 for the civilian sector of intel and cops. And that was a warning sign that this thing was tied to the civilian sector, not the military, or it would have been like a 9mm or a 45 automatic, which are military issue in essence, but not the 40 caliber Glock. And the other thing was AR-15, a semi-automatic rifle, which anybody that shot a semi-automatic knows that you cannot squeeze your trigger finger back and forth that many times to take out 72 people that fast. One man who has never been trained in firearms, and some people in the conspiracy thing have tried to say, well, he was Monarch programmed to be a serial killer. No way. You cannot take somebody untrained in firearms and weapons and ballistics and with a semi-automatic rifle that's prone to jam like the AR-15 to take out 72 people that fast and disappear. That was a well-oiled operation of false flags, and a very methodic death crew came in, probably 4 people, took them out using a personal defense weapon, the FN-P90, and the bullet fragments can look like a .223 because it is a .22 caliber sized bullet, but the PDW, personal defense weapon, was also developed in the 90s, and this is a very low recoil weapon that can be used in close quarters very efficiently, where a normal machine gun or a AR-15, the barrel would rise if you shot it. You know, you couldn't shoot it accurately, and then pumped on adrenaline and fear, and never been trained in firearms. James Holmes is a fall guy, and he was doped up on dope called scopolamine that's been used in Monarch MK for a long time out of Colombia.
So there wasn't MK Ultra component to it, but
yes.
Okay.
But
why?
Holmes disappeared and was doped up to be the fall guy to shut his daddy up on one side.
Okay. On one side.
From exposing DARPA and other things that he was tied to. So Holmes is the fall guy taking the heat for what a very well-oiled death crew did. Right after that, the Sikh temple was shot up, and one of the guys was military, but the cops did take the one guy out. So it didn't work as well. And they have had other false flags happen, Sandy Hook and you name them, the Boston Marathon.
Right.
These are all false flags and everything that happened. But what I found was, out of that, I learned that there were interagency wars with each other, and intel agencies are at war with Homeland Security, who are America's Gestapo via the Patriot Act, in a nutshell. And intel agencies that have patriots do not get along with Homeland Security. And there were cops there that were Homeland Security dressed as cops and everything, and definitely tied to it. And when they dropped a Glock, that exposed Homeland Security, who had just happened to buy millions of rounds of .40 caliber ammunition. Millions of rounds. We picked out fragments of bullets indicating a PDW, the .40 caliber Glock, civilian sector, not military. Homeland Security buys all these .40 caliber bullets, millions of rounds, and everything for law enforcement, but Homeland Security, who are America's Gestapo today. And there are interagency wars, because I get called by this guy to go in, and we see the aftermath, which was very clean. It was a very efficient black op. And they just disappeared into the night, taking out 70 people, over 10 dead. It was a very polished black op.
I do have a question about the shooter, James Holmes, and I'm not sure the statistics of mass shooters, and I know most of them kill themselves or have suicide by cop. He just kind of turned himself in, or was just standing there.
Well, he was just standing there, but he was extremely doped up on scopolamine and had no memory of it.
Wow.
I sent you guys a link to it. Basically, we looked at it in the aftermath. We watched all the false media and groomed people telling about what happened to scare people. While Holmes had been carted off, was doped up on scopolamine, is still doped up, and they grew a beard on him to make him look like an Islamic terrorist, and now he's a convert to Islam, and he's just an MK puppet and everything, sitting there taking the heat. But he did not pull off that. Holmes was not the shooter. That was a well-polished death crew, and those theaters in there where the shootings happened were not shot up and shredded, But low recoil personal defense weapons like the P90 that can imitate with a .22 caliber size bullet the AR-15 or M16 was what was used, and the .40 caliber pistols, yes. And the death crew disappeared, and they found the doped up Holmes. He was not the shooter. And so digging the fragments up, proof of this was done, and research done by attachments and friends in the U.S. Texas Rangers down in Texas. My teacher is also an honorary Texas Ranger down there. And so this was all looked at, who helped me out. I turned in a report that led me being called out to Washington, D.C., and some things out there that I can't really, because I had to sign a Disclosure Act, which is essentially the U.S. Secrecy Act, to keep my mouth shut about details of it.
That.
But I got called to D.C. Sometimes we had to meet in the Library of Congress, looking at microfiche, to get any privacy and all. And I was summoned out there, and based on the report that I had turned in to them, and I got called out on this, and then I released an article that I could disclose as much as I could. It was called Military versus Civilian Sector Black Ops. Aurora Revisited True Grit Style. There are videos there that show what a personal defense weapon looks like, how it operates in ballistics. There is a video there on scopolamine, the dope that Holmes is doped up on. You can watch, and you'll understand well what it is. It is at Truth News Info, run by John Vodilla, a very serious truther and all, who I endorse, much like Jay and Amy DiMichelli of No One Has to Die Tomorrow. They are genuine. They have given of their own free lives to the truther movement that's real. And the article on the Black Op at Aurora, you can look up at truthnews.info, thetruthnews.info, and all, and look up Aurora on the search. It's called Military versus Civilian Sector Black Ops, Aurora Revisited True Grit Style. I give the ballistics of the weaponry, why Holmes, who had never been even trained in firearms, could not be the shooter, even if he was Monarch MK'd. You just don't miraculously turn people into proficient killing assassins. It doesn't work that way. Even in Vietnam, the CIA Phoenix program used men out of Navy SEALs and the Green Beret to make assassins and killers, to control the dope show of the Golden Triangle. These were not inexperienced men. And so some of the conspiracy researchers that think Holmes was MK'd to be a serial killer, nada, man. You just don't magically turn them into assassins on that level, taking 70 people out that fast with an AR-15. Biologically and physically impossible.
I agree with you after looking at Aurora very carefully. But Mr. Ray, now on the other side of that, aside from picking Holmes as the fall guy to silence his father, between Aurora and Sandy Hook and so on and so forth, what's the ultimate objective here? Why? What's going on?
Well, it's the fear tactic and disinformation tactic to one, establish authority of Homeland Security, just like the Gestapo, and disarm the citizens effectively, and yet be peaceful and democratic and liberal, but disarm them. It's disarmament, which is, and disarmament that began in 1968 in Congress. That congressman, a Republican by the way, was at the Nuremberg trials and got that idea from the Nazis, who used disarmament as the Nazis rose in the 30s to disarm the nation and then prepare them for war as bad guys. And all. But that senator introduced that disarmament and gun control policy in the year 1968, the same year that Lyndon Johnson put Social Security in the general fund to be tapped.
That's interesting.
And all.
Connect
These things
those
are all
dots.
very connected. And all. But the main thing is the gun control thing is more of the agenda, to disarm gradually the citizens who are going to rise up against it, but to justify it more and more and more, to turn in their weapons and get national IDs and different things like that, to become more monitored. And to our enemies on the outside, with the rise up of stuff, if they can put it down peacefully, then that shows too, and they're using it as a test mechanism to see how apathetic and how pacifist this is going to be to disarm the citizens. And they do these atrocious acts to provoke the citizens, against disarmament and things like that, but they're just seeing how much they can play the public and disinform them as they move into disarmament gradually, slowly, step by step.
And they're being so successful in their, we can put up with, or we are putting up with, much to my amazement, people being sexually assaulted at airports, the different states going through and taking away our gun rights, or Second Amendment rights, I shouldn't say gun rights, and they're so effective at doing this. It's incredible to me as I watch this. This is all part of this larger agenda, right? I mean, this is it.
But America, the Norman Rockwell vision of good old America was dying in the 50s, very carefully orchestrated, and all with rock and roll, but plastic rebellion to break up the family unit, and the word teenager to separate the generations, and the whole youth culture that evolved out of it. But it was step by step with long-term plans, and they did it in the 50s, and then they brought it into the psychedelic 60s with the great social experiment, and taking it way, way farther, and injecting the occult New Age ideologies, even in the evangelical movement through guys like Chuck Smith, Frisbee, and what we know today as the charismatic movement. And of course, by then, a lot of these well-known evangelicals were Freemasons, very highly ranked. Because
and we all know that.
Yep, and when war for profit fails, it's going to come down to religion. You know, that's why these guys get that 33rd degree Freemason invite.
Wow.
You know.
Well, okay. Now we've got just a few minutes left of our program here. I've got to ask you. 2012 seemed to be a turning point of a spiritual turning point. You had so many things happen in 2012.
To the occult world, the year 2012 was the year of the dragon. It was the year of the water dragon, meaning Leviathan, Job 41. It was not a year of bold-faced transition, but a very subtle transition of the serpent. But in the Chinese astrology, it was the year of the dragon, and the element was water. And that can only be one thing, Leviathan, Job 41, and in Isaiah 27, Leviathan, the symbol of the fallen one.
Wow.
You know.
Wow.
But that was the occult element behind the year 2012. This year, 2013, is the year of the snake. And thus it has proceeded from the dragon to the snake. This is the year of the serpent and all. And the elites follow astrology. We know that. Even Reagan and his wife Nancy had an astrologer that they consulted very frequently. You know, Bohemian Grove guy, Ronnie.
Right.
Okay.
They use the dark sciences, the dark knowledge for their
They
earthly
follow it
gain.
religiously.
Is it fair to say that the occult, the secret societies, the power brokers, is it, because I often say this, and I want to be very correct when I say this, they follow the King James version of the Bible to the letter, do they not?
Well, they know it well, but they work at perverting it.
Correct. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yes, and all. They're knowledgeable of it because they know what they're doing and they know who they serve at the highest levels. You must understand that Freemasonry, the biggest secret society in the Western Hemisphere, is a tool like oligarchy operates as a government with many secret things behind the scenes and rulers unseen and shadow government. But what Freemasonry was invented for by the 1600s and the 1700s, when the black nobility took over Britain and set up the city of London under William III of the House of Orange in the year 1689-90, when he became king for a while, and set the next rule in 1714 of House Hanover from Germany of the black nobility Venetian. What happened there was that Freemasonry was used as an indoctrination tool to enlist lackeys from the working class to serve the elites. See, Freemasonry was set up as a secret society of shadow government, disinformation, and oligarchy to enlist lackeys from the poorer working class, and they will rise them up. They know nothing. They're disinformed at the lower levels until they hit the 4th degree, where they enter through the royal arch of either Scottish or York Rite in England, and then they move up the food chain and they learn as they rise what's really going on, more and more and more. But they are people who were out of the working class, not necessarily royals, but lackeys of the throne and the royals and the black nobility.
Seeing that
Freemasonry was invented with other secret societies to enlist lackeys out of the working class to bring them up to test their loyalty and make them complicit in criminal activity at the highest levels for bribes and blackmail to keep them loyal and faithful to their ends. You know, and most people, a lot of them that get the 33rd degree invite are generally and very often complicit in some very serious criminal activity like murder.
Yeah, it almost, the way I understand it, seems like a prerequisite to get to that level. What you said about the last year being the year of
the dragon.
Was it the dragon, and then this year is the year of the snake. Is there anything in your mind that we'll see in 2013 that will turn things upside down in a way
what
that...
expect? What should we expect this year?
Well, the snake is very subtle. Even when the word black nobility is mentioned, or royals, people usually look at the UK and everything, and the royals in England, because we are tied to them through the City of London and other things since the year 1871, when we were a broke nation from the Civil War that they contrived. You know? And so what goes on in the royal world of the black nobility in Europe is often unseen, apart from what goes on in the UK. But in that year, this year, on Walpurgis, one of the highest occult holidays with a lot of human sacrifice, Willem-Alexander took over the throne in the Netherlands of the House of Orange and everything, and his granddaddy, Prince Bernhard, was Nazi SS and co-founder of Bilderberg. And so there's going to be a new king presiding at the Bilderberg this year, and he will be there. And the royals from the Netherlands also control things like Shell Oil and many other big interests behind the scenes and stuff on the European side. And you know, they look at the UK royals and blame the House Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, but you know, Prince Andreas in Germany is who rules over House Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. You don't ever hear about him. And you don't hear about the royals in Belgium and everything, who are also partly Saxe-Coburg-Gotha and the Venetian black nobility, but very tied to the Vatican, who have the castle of the Dark Mother, the Chateau Amaroi, where the 1,000 points of light is that George H.W. Bush bragged about in the year 1988.
Wow. Mr. Ray, I got to tell you, we're about 45 seconds away from the close of our program. I just want to say we could have probably another 10 hours of you talking. I do hope that you would consider coming back on our program to explain more about this. We are at the close of our show. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a warrior for Jesus Christ and for telling the truth. One of the few people out there that tell the truth about what's really going on. And I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
I want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. You, like the producer, Mitch Santel, are men of honor and courage and work for God Incorporated and our Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth.
My friend, God bless you. God bless you, and thank you very much for being on the program. Have a great night, folks. We've reached the close of our program. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. See you tomorrow night.
Don't forget Nathan Liao, tomorrow night, 8 p.m.